And you talked about the house that you used. Can you talk a little bit about how you found that house?
Well, it's interesting because when Jamie first wrote the script, it was actually he purpose fit the whole script to my house. He'd stayed at my house during a writing session that we were doing, and it was the original inspiration. So originally we talked about shooting it at my home, and my home, I've got a country farm, but it's a fairly modern place. It's only 12 years old, and it sort of dawned on me that you know, so much of this film is the two brothers sitting there talking to each other, and you know, we're not the most handsome of men, and I thought I need something visually more interesting to sort of take. I wanted the film to be visual, to be cinematic, and I realised my farm really wasn't going to cut it, and so that's why we went out looking for locations, and I just, like I often do, I made sure that the brief was very broad, because again, I love it when a location or an actor or a prop can bring something to the story that embellishes it. Well, we struck gold with this particular location. Everything that you see in the film is shot in that house, in his backyard, and in the surrounding area of dear old Bill's home and property. He actually has all those radios that you see in the film, all those cars. And for a little while we discussed how do we go about removing them, and then I thought, well, hang on, let's use them as an asset. So I actually went back with Jamie and we wrote them into the film.
Well, there's the owner, because the idea of originally financing the film was kind of revolved a lot around using your house because you know, it was a cost-effective way to do it, and there was a bit of it actually triggered a leap in a whole bunch of areas. You know, suddenly we were all staying out there in the house. We had to find accommodation for people, and I'll never forget the day that you called me because you went out to the location with your dad, and loved that character, and for me as a producer, it was really extremely exhilarating to have the writing team, director, the creative department go out to a location and have the time to actually write certain elements of the script again or augment it.
Yeah, I mean, look, I mean, collaboration can be difficult because I completely honestly, when you sent me photos of like old cars and radios, I thought it's just going to seem not organic, you know. But then there were just a couple of things that started to click in terms of the father paying more attention to these collectibles than the kids and stuff like that, where you started to get confidence that, to a point where once we were through with that draft, you couldn't imagine the script without it. In fact, the script seemed really shitty before it, like, you know, like, because it is a very writer. You know, it's a writer's script, those original drafts. It doesn't have much visuality, you know, so it's those flares that really lifted it, you know, from something very plain to hopefully something, whether you like it or not, is unique.
It's also what I loved about it more so is these two brothers spending so much of the time talking about how the lack of validation that they got from their parental figures. And you're looking at a house which is their childhood home, and it is completely invaded with these radios. You know, this stepfather seems to have filled their family home with his own interests. So I kind of liked that as a sort of a foil for their discussions. And then later on we find out that, you know, not everything is as we've been sort of told. So I just, and also just visually it was so beautiful to look at. It looked like a set when I walked in there. And we, the owner of the place, Bill, he had two, that we couldn't, I don't know if you remember this. He said there were two things we couldn't mess with at all. He didn't care if we moved the radios or his old cars. He said, you mustn't remove any of the cobwebs and don't get rid of the snake. And he had a brown snake that was living in a fish pond out the front of where we were all shooting, that had been living there for 20 years. And he said, we get along. I don't mind him, he doesn't mind me. You can't disrupt the snake. Luckily, it was cold weather, and so it was hibernating. But I thought that was pretty amusing.
And I remember, the thing I remember most about the discovery of this location was that he was an avid collector. He is one of the world's leading experts or collectors of vintage Austins, limousines, and he had in one of his containers General MacArthur's limousine, which he used and had he rejected and brought his own Cadillac out from the States because it was English build, and he had it in a container, and he used that because, of course, the Pacific invasion, or the turning point in the war, was when they launched back into the Philippines, and he did it in Melbourne. And so he's found this limousine, and he has it in a container, and it's his pride and joy. When there's a process of building a relationship with him was about letting him bring this limousine out of the container and admiring it and sitting around in it.
He's like a South by Southwest documentary just waiting to
Yeah, he
Oh,
sure
is
is.
Like, quirky collector, he should be on next year.
But more importantly, he was an ex-Weather Bureau guy. And I highly recommend for any young filmmakers that are looking for locations, try and find a location that is owned by a Weather Bureau guy, because that's because he lived on location. We got him a caravan, and he sort of lived just outside the house. But we got these really accurate weather forecasts every day.
Yeah, we did.
We
did. And I'd say too, he saw the movie 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
And it was one of the most joyful moments of this process so far is watching someone who allowed a film crew to enter his life, his home, and the reaction he had to the film was just really joyful. He was proud of it.
I don't know if it's a film you should feel joy.
Yeah.
Well, just the achievement.
No, I know what you mean.
Yeah. And I'm also kind of in shock that what exactly
What we were doing.
the
I'm
thing
glad
we were doing.
my house is a crime scene.
Yeah.
I've always wanted to know.
I got a feeling worse things have happened in there.
I gotta say,
My gut feeling.
that was also another reason why I looked out. So is I was worried about. I do get nervous about shooting, particularly very dark, scenes in your own home. There is something kind of, maybe I'm superstitious.
Yeah, you are.
Yeah.
The thing is, why hasn't that whole house sold? Because
Yeah.